It wasn't one specific thing that tipped me off, no, that would have been too easy. It was a series of little, nagging doubts. You know, those passing feelings that gnaw at you but are too faint to grip. They say trust is the foundation of every relationship, but trust, I've found, is like a fragile sheet of glass. And once the cracks start appearing, it takes only a light touch for the whole thing to shatter. It started innocently enough. My wife, Sarah, had always been busy with work. Her job in marketing demanded late nights, early mornings, endless Zoom calls, and weekends holed up in our home office. I'd always admired her ambition, after all, it was one of the qualities that first attracted me to her. But lately, her schedule seemed more erratic, the hours longer, the meetings more urgent. Still, I chalked it up to the pressures of her high-profile clients. Until she began acting different. Sarah used to come home tired, ready to kick off her shoes and unwind. But over the past few weeks, I'd noticed she was doing something strange. She'd head to the bathroom immediately upon coming home. A quick shower, she'd say, claiming it helped her relax after a stressful day. Odd, but maybe I was overthinking it. Then, one night, I caught the faint whiff of cologne on her jacket, and my stomach turned. It wasn't mine. And unless she was suddenly experimenting with men's fragrances, it had to come from somewhere, or someone. I pushed the thoughts aside for a while, told myself I was being paranoid, maybe insecure. After all, Sarah and I had been married for 5 years, and she'd never given me reason to doubt her. We had built a life together, a life I thought was solid. But the doubts kept multiplying. It wasn't just the showers. She'd started guarding her phone, even taking it with her to the bathroom, which she'd never done before. If a message came through while we were watching TV, she'd check it hastily, giving me only a brief explanation like, just work stuff. But the kicker? She'd become distant. Our conversations turned shallow, her answers vague. It was as if her mind was always elsewhere. And that elsewhere became all I could think about. I decided I had to find out the truth, one way or another. I needed to know what was happening behind that guarded phone screen, beneath that elusive new perfume. If I was being paranoid, I'd accept it and move on. But if I was right, if she was hiding something from me, well, I'd deal with that, too. But not before collecting every piece of evidence. One night, I casually suggested we do something together, just the two of us, like old times. Dinner, maybe a weekend trip out of town. She barely looked up, muttering, maybe. I'll have to check my work schedule. And there it was again, the brush off, the same distant tone. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to sit around, guessing and doubting. I was going to investigate. The first step was to break into her phone. I'd never had any interest in her passwords or her private conversations before, but now it felt like my right, like something I deserved. Besides, if she had nothing to hide, then my conscience would be clear. That night, while she was asleep, I crept out of bed and made my way to the bathroom where she'd left her purse. Her phone was inside, and my heart raced as I pulled it out, careful not to make a sound. Unlocking it wasn't easy, but I'd picked up enough clues to guess her passcode. She'd always been sentimental, so I tried our anniversary. Nothing. Next, her favorite number. No luck. And then it hit me, her work ID number, which she used for almost everything. The screen flickered to life. I was in. I didn't even know where to start. Her messages. Emails. Photos. I began scrolling through her texts, feeling my hands tremble. My mind raced with all the things I could find. Maybe I'd find innocent messages from her colleagues, or maybe, confirmation of my worst fears. I felt like an intruder, like a thief in my own marriage. But if she'd been betraying me, I had every right to dig for the truth. And that's when I saw it, his name. Mark. I didn't know a Mark, and she'd never mentioned him to me before. Their conversation history was sparse, but there were a few unmistakable signs: the way she laughed at his every message, the late-hour time stamps, the words she'd use like, "can't wait," and "soon." They were subtle, nothing incriminating on their own, but enough to set me on edge. Who was this Mark? Why was he texting my wife at midnight? I decided I'd follow this trail, and if there was a fire beneath this smoke, I'd find it. But if I was going to do this, I'd do it right. I'd be patient. Methodical. I'd leave no trace that I'd been there, no sign of my suspicions. If Sarah was hiding something, she'd never see me coming. Once I unlocked that phone, there was no going back. I'd tasted the faintest hint of betrayal, and now I was hungry for the truth. But I couldn't just confront her with a handful of suspicious messages. That would only give her a chance to deny it, or worse, make her hide it better. I needed a plan, one that would reveal everything. For the next few days, I played my part perfectly, keeping my suspicions locked deep inside. I went about my usual routine, laughing at her jokes, smiling when she talked about her day. If she was hiding something, she never suspected that I was onto her. Every time she'd glance my way, I'd play the part of the oblivious husband. But beneath the surface, I was unraveling her life, thread by thread. First, I began tracking her movements. Thankfully, Sarah was predictable in some ways. She had a schedule and stuck to it like clockwork. Monday through Friday, she left at exactly 7:30 a.m. for work, came home by 6 p.m., sometimes later. I noted down her comings and goings, looking for patterns, anything unusual that might reveal where she was spending her time when she wasn't with me. Then, one Friday, an opportunity came knocking. Sarah left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter when she went to grab a quick shower. My pulse quickened as I picked it up, my hand steady as I went directly to her messages. The conversation with Mark had expanded. It wasn't all that frequent, just a few short exchanges each day, but they felt like little breadcrumbs leading me to the truth. One particular message caught my eye. Monday, 4 p.m. at our spot. She'd replied with a casual, "can't wait." I felt a surge of rage rise within me. Monday. Our spot. I'd never heard of this spot, and I knew every detail of Sarah's life. Or at least, I thought I had. When she returned from her shower, I was already in the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a game. She glanced at me briefly, smiling as though nothing was out of the ordinary. But I had already memorized her plans, and my mind was racing. I'd let her think she was in control, that she was getting away with her secret, whatever it was. But come Monday, I'd be right behind her. That weekend was one of the longest of my life. Every time she laughed or kissed me goodnight, I felt a new pang of betrayal. It was maddening, this dance we were doing, where I knew things she didn't, where every loving gesture felt like a lie. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were full of faceless shadows and a wife who kept slipping through my fingers. Finally, Monday came, and I could hardly concentrate at work. My hands were shaking, my mind a blur as I waited for the clock to hit 4. Around 3:30, I slipped out, barely aware of my surroundings as I got into my car. I'd memorized her route to work, knew every turn she made. And when I saw her car, a few blocks away from her office, my heart thundered. She wasn't alone. A man got into the passenger seat, and they drove off together. I followed at a safe distance, careful not to tip her off. They pulled into a small, unassuming parking lot behind a quiet coffee shop. I parked across the street, far enough away that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough that I could see their every move. She laughed, and he smiled. He reached out, brushing her hand across the table. The sight made my blood boil. In all our years together, I'd never seen her look at me the way she looked at him in that moment. It was pure, unguarded, the kind of smile she used to reserve for me. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. For an hour, I sat there, watching them share stories, coffee, and lingering glances. He'd lean in close, and she'd smile like a love-struck teenager, completely unaware of my gaze burning into them from across the street. By the time they left, my mind was made up. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was an affair, and she tried to hide it from me. And worse, she'd succeeded, until now. But I wasn't just angry. I was calculating, cold. I couldn't let her know I'd seen them, not yet. I needed more, something undeniable, something she couldn't worm her way out of. And I needed a way to make them both pay. They'd played me for a fool, but I wasn't the fool they thought I was. For the next week, I planned everything meticulously. I would gather every bit of evidence, expose every lie, and when the moment was right, I'd confront her with everything. No chance for denial, no chance for escape. She'd face the full force of my betrayal, and he'd realize what happens when you mess with another man's wife. I'd make sure they regretted every last moment they'd spent together. But I wasn't rushing. I was calm, collected, and patient. And as the days went by, every stolen glance between them, every lingering touch, every lie she told me became fuel for the fire that was building inside me. The countdown had started, and they had no idea. I knew I had to approach this methodically. I couldn't afford to let my emotions interfere or rush in and ruin everything. I needed more than a few glances and subtle touches. If I was going to confront Sarah, I needed irrefutable proof. And so, I set out to gather it. That Tuesday, I took a day off work, pretending I wasn't feeling well. Sarah left as usual, her routine carefully timed down to the minute. I waited 10 minutes, enough for her to be well on her way, then slipped out and headed to a nearby electronics store. There, I picked up a tiny voice-activated recorder and a small GPS tracking device. If she was going to meet him again, I'd know exactly where she was and who she was with. This wasn't about trust anymore, it was about the truth. Once I got home, I carefully hid the recorder under the driver's seat of her car. It would pick up any conversation she had in the car with him. Then, I attached the GPS tracker to the underside of her bumper. With a sense of grim satisfaction, I went back inside, feeling more in control. Whatever they were up to, I would know. Over the next few days, I kept my cool, going through our routine as though nothing was wrong. I asked her about work, her day, even her friends, all the while watching her reactions closely. Her answers were always evasive, like she was holding something back. It only confirmed my suspicions. Wednesday rolled around, and I checked the GPS tracker. Sure enough, her car had been at the same coffee shop where I'd seen her with Mark. I replayed the audio from the recorder, heart pounding, and it was all there, the laughter, the flirtatious teasing, the sound of them planning their next meeting. It was sickening, yet oddly empowering. I was building a case, and soon it would be airtight. By Friday, I had more than enough to confront her, but I decided to wait just a bit longer. Every extra day I waited, every message I uncovered, was like adding another nail to the coffin of our relationship. I wanted her to feel the weight of everything I knew, to understand that this wasn't just a passing fling or some midlife crisis. She'd betrayed me, and now she'd pay for it. Then, over the weekend, I got the last piece of evidence I needed. On Saturday night, while she was in the shower, a message popped up on her phone. She had forgotten to take it with her, and there it was on the screen, Mark's name and a single, sickening sentence, "Can't wait to see you at the hotel tomorrow." I couldn't resist. I opened the message thread, and my worst fears were confirmed. They'd been meeting regularly, and tomorrow they were planning to spend the night together. The details were all there, from the room reservation to the time they'd meet. It was infuriatingly explicit, a clear, undeniable message that left no room for doubt. I felt like the walls were closing in around me, the air thick with betrayal and rage. She wasn't just seeing him on the side, she was lying to my face, living a double life. Every memory of our time together, every shared moment, was tainted now. But the pain was quickly replaced by cold, calculated anger. This was my chance to turn the tables, to show them both that I wasn't some fool who could be played. I spent the rest of the night in a fevered daze, planning exactly how I'd handle this. I'd catch them red-handed, make sure neither of them could deny a thing. And when the dust settled, they'd both learn that I wasn't a man to be crossed. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my life. The next morning, I got up as usual, smiling and kissing her goodbye as she left for her work trip. Little did she know, I'd be right behind her. With every piece of evidence in place, I had nothing left to lose. Today, they would get what they deserved. As I followed her car to the hotel, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. I was ready. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, thought through every possible reaction, every outcome. I was prepared for whatever I'd find, whatever excuse she might offer. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't walk away from this as the victim. I parked a few cars down, watching as she checked in, waited in the lobby, and then headed to the elevators. I knew the room number from her messages. I took a few deep breaths, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it, the moment of truth. And as I walked into that hotel, my mind was made up. They wouldn't see me coming, and they wouldn't walk away unscathed. As I stepped into the hotel lobby, a quiet but intense fury fueled every step. The walls, the people, even the ambient music seemed to fade away. My eyes were fixed on the path that would lead me to their room. I had the room number memorized from Sarah's messages with Mark, and I felt a cold determination in my every move. Today, I was done being the victim. I took the elevator up, steadying my breathing and calming my mind as I reached their floor. I moved silently down the hallway, stopping just outside their room. I could hear muffled voices through the door, laughter mingled with hushed tones. My hand clenched into a fist. They were in there, together, indulging in the lies they'd woven. I had all the proof I needed, but I wanted them to know they'd been caught in the act. With one swift motion, I knocked on the door. My heart was pounding, but my expression was calm, unreadable. There was a moment of silence, followed by the sound of someone shuffling across the room. A few seconds later, the door cracked open just a bit, and Mark's face appeared, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion. I watched as realization dawned in his eyes. Who are you?" he stammered, glancing back over his shoulder, no doubt wondering if Sarah was prepared for what was coming. "Her husband," I replied coldly, my voice barely above a whisper but laced with a threat that was impossible to ignore. "Now, if you'd kindly step aside, I think it's time we all had a little chat." He hesitated, his face turning pale. His eyes darted to Sarah, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, her expression morphing from shock to horror as she realized who was standing at the door. For a split second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, frozen, unable to process the fact that her double life had finally come crashing down. "James, what are you doing here?" she stuttered, her voice barely audible, as if she couldn't believe that I discovered her secret. "Don't act surprised," I replied, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. I shut the door behind me, trapping them both in their little den of deceit. I could feel the anger coursing through me, but I kept my tone calm, my words measured. "You thought you could keep this up forever? Sneaking around, lying to my face, and laughing about it behind closed doors?" Sarah's eyes flickered with panic. She tried to stand, taking a step towards me, hands raised as if to explain herself. "James, please, it's not what you think," she pleaded, desperation seeping into her voice. "I was going to tell you, I swear, I was going to explain everything." "Explain what?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Explain how you've been meeting him in secret. How you've been lying to me every day while pretending nothing was wrong." Mark, still rooted to the spot by the door, looked uncomfortable, clearly wanting to be anywhere but here. He seemed to be considering an escape, his eyes darting to the door as if he might bolt at any moment. But I wasn't about to let him off that easily. And you, I said, turning to Mark, my voice dripping with contempt. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you'd just waltz in, ruin my marriage, and walk away without a scratch? He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He glanced at Sarah, as if hoping she'd save him from this nightmare. But I didn't give either of them a chance to talk. I needed them to understand the depth of their betrayal, to feel the full weight of what they'd done. For months, I've watched you both lie to my face, hiding behind a thin veneer of decency while you betrayed everything we had. And you, I added, turning back to Sarah, you're the worst of all. I trusted you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. She finally found her voice, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. James, please, it was a mistake, she said, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to come up with something, anything, that would make this better. I never meant for it to go this far. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. A mistake? I said, shaking my head. No, Sarah. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. This is a choice. Every lie you told, every time you met with him, that was a choice you made, knowing full well what it would do to me. Mark shifted uncomfortably, looking like he wanted to disappear. But I wasn't finished with him yet. I stepped closer, and he flinched, his eyes wide with fear. You knew she was married, didn't you? Or did she lie to you about that, too? His face flushed, and he looked away, muttering something under his breath. But I wasn't interested in his excuses. I'd heard enough lies for one lifetime. As I stood there, facing them both, I felt the weight of everything I'd uncovered, every secret they'd kept, pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. And yet, for the first time in months, I felt free. I'd uncovered the truth, and I was ready to move forward, without either of them. I took a step back, letting the silence settle over the room, letting them feel the full impact of what they'd done. I hope you're both happy together, I said finally, my voice cold and detached. Because as far as I'm concerned, you deserve each other. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, leaving them to deal with the mess they'd created. And as I walked down the hallway, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. They'd betrayed me, but I was the one in control now. I was the one walking away. This wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. But it was the end of us. And that, I realized, was all I needed. After leaving the hotel, I knew the confrontation was only the beginning. I needed a plan that would make them regret every lie they'd ever told, every time they'd laughed behind my back. But I also knew that revenge wasn't something to rush. It was something to savor, a slow burn that would leave them both wondering when it would finally end. The first step was to make Sarah think she was safe. For the next few days, I pretended to forgive her, pretending that I was willing to move on. I told her I'd been hurt but was ready to rebuild our marriage if she promised to be honest. I could see the relief in her eyes, the way she thought she'd gotten away with it. She had no idea this was just the beginning. To lay the groundwork, I began subtly letting her believe she was still in control. I accidentally left my phone unlocked with a few messages open, implying that I'd been talking to a lawyer. Just hints, nothing explicit. Just enough to make her nervous, to make her wonder if she really was out of the woods. I saw her glancing at my phone, her eyes filled with guilt and curiosity. Meanwhile, I reached out to Mark's wife, Lauren. She was just as devastated as I'd been when I told her everything. Together, we devised a plan that would expose them both and make sure everyone knew the truth. It would take time and patience, but we were willing to wait. Lauren and I kept our alliance discreet. We shared details, building a case and gathering evidence that would leave Sarah and Mark nowhere to hide. I went about my daily life as if nothing was amiss, keeping Sarah comfortable and unsuspecting. Meanwhile, Lauren and I meticulously catalogued messages, tracked their movements, and spoke to close friends, subtly exposing the truth. Mark and Sarah had no idea that the people around them were catching on. One part of my plan required me to protect my finances before the divorce hit. With the help of my lawyer, I began quietly transferring assets and repositioning funds, all while making it look like normal transactions. Sarah had no clue what I was up to, nor did she know I'd be leaving her with as little as possible. Every dollar I secured was one less she could claim. Lauren and I decided on a day for the big reveal. We planted evidence subtly over the following weeks, an anonymous tip here, a few carefully placed photos there. Slowly but surely, whispers began spreading among Sarah and Mark's social circles. They noticed that people were treating them differently, and I could see Sarah's anxiety growing. They were feeling the walls close in, but still had no idea how far we'd go. The day I filed for divorce, I made sure Sarah was served the papers in a very public place, her workplace, where she couldn't escape. The documents detailed all the evidence of her affair and requested full separation of assets. I'd covered every angle, ensuring she'd have no financial leverage. The look on her face as she opened the envelope was priceless. She knew she was cornered. Lauren confronted Mark the same day. He tried to deny everything, but she laid out every piece of evidence we'd gathered. He was stunned, helpless as his marriage unraveled right in front of him. Lauren had taken steps to ensure he'd leave with nothing, just as I had with Sarah. The two of them had believed they'd be together, but they were quickly discovering they'd lose everything instead. With the legal groundwork complete, I turned my attention to their reputation. Sarah and Mark had built their social circles on a foundation of lies, and now it was time to shatter that image. We spread the story subtly, ensuring that friends, family, and colleagues saw the truth. They couldn't go anywhere without facing judgment and whispers, isolated by the web of deceit they'd spun. When Sarah saw the divorce proceedings take shape, she finally understood the depths of my preparations. Her financial support was cut off, and she had no access to our shared assets. I watched as she struggled to keep up appearances, realizing that her betrayal had cost her not just her marriage but her lifestyle. She tried reaching out, pleading, but I ignored her. There was nothing left to discuss. Lauren took things a step further, contacting Mark's employer and revealing the affair. She showed them the evidence of his dishonesty, exposing his lack of ethics. The fallout was immediate, his credibility was shot, and he was asked to resign. He lost not just his wife and home but also his career, left scrambling to rebuild his life from scratch. With everything in place, I met with Sarah one last time. She was a shadow of her former self, visibly shaken and realizing how far she'd fallen. I told her that our lives had become irreparable, and there was no going back. This was my closure, and as I walked away, I felt lighter, finally free of the weight of her betrayal. She had nothing left to hold over me. It's been months since everything unraveled. I've rebuilt my life, finding strength in the closure I needed. Lauren and I remain close friends, having supported each other through the worst. Sarah and Mark are barely whispers now, isolated by the fallout they created. My revenge was complete, and the scars they left are healing, replaced by a newfound freedom and peace. Looking back, I don't regret a thing. Sometimes, karma needs a little push, and I made sure they got exactly what they deserved.